Ashitey, Trebi-Ollennu, Ayanna Howard, you're both engaged in one of the most exciting careers to be had. Ashitey first, tell me what propelled you into a career in robotics?
As a boy, I was always curious. And I think it's always start with curiosity. And like all kids, we want to learn. And we have what I usually tell kids, that they all have fertile imagination. So when you have a fertile imagination, what you need is an environment to encourage that imagination. And that's why I got into robotics, because as a boy, I've always imagined, how we can fly planes without people. How can we get computers to fly planes? And that's what kind of inspired me. I was born in Accra, Ghana, and I live very close to the airport. And I see planes coming in and out, and they take off and they land, and I was very fascinated by them. And I always thought, how can we fly planes without people in them? It was a fairly weird idea, and that's how I got started in engineering. And I also tend to like shortwave radio at the time, so I used to listen to the BBC, and you used to get that thing called static, and you keep fine-tuning them. And as a boy, I wanted to figure out, why do we get static? And how does the radio work? So I got an opportunity to open the radio up, and even if it was working perfectly, I started playing with it. So that's the kind of curiosity that we try to encourage in kids these days. You just have to be curious, and the doors will open for you.
Ayanna, I've heard that you were inspired by an iconic American TV series called The Bionic Woman. Tell me, what was it about that really motivated you into robotics?
So this was around middle school, and that's the time when everywhere, people are asking, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? Like as a 12-year-old, you have to know what you're going to do at 80. And so I was totally into sci-fi, totally into things like Star Trek and Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica. It was also the first time they started showing women in a positive light. So there was Wonder Woman, which is also coming out now, and Bionic Woman. And one of the things that I enjoyed about it was that when I saw it, I could see myself. I can see like, oh, this is what I want to do. I didn't want to be the Bionic Woman, but I wanted to build a Bionic Woman. And so at that point, it wasn't called robotics, but I knew I wanted to build a Bionic Woman. And that, of course, turns into doing robotics later on.
Well, admiring a really iconic character is very different from actually getting into the field of robotics to make it happen. Do you think it was much more difficult for you at that time because you were a girl?
I think so. I think then especially it was to be an engineer, which was considered very geeky. That wasn't something that you did as a girl. Even though a lot of us are good at math and science, you just didn't go into engineering or computer science. And so growing up, one of the hardest things was not seeing people that looked like you, not seeing women, not seeing girls, not seeing faculty members that looked like you. But I think because I had a desire and I was really stubborn, and I was a little bit of a tomboy, it was okay. It was like, oh yeah, okay, these boys, they don't really know what they were doing. It's got to be up to us girls to figure it out. So I think that was more of that inner drive that helped. Now it's so much better. It's so much better. And so now it really is encouraging to see other women like me as well as young girls getting involved in robotics and engineering.
Ashitey, you mentioned your childhood in Ghana. Did you ever imagine that you would, within a relatively short space of time, be in the heady world of NASA?
So actually, when I was a boy, I always wanted to be an aeronautic engineer, and I never thought about space exploration, but I always enjoyed automation. I think my late dad and my mom always say they're not surprised I work at NASA, but I was always interested in building things that are autonomous. So I was just curious, and the way I got to NASA is even funnier, because I did my bachelor's in London, Queen Mary College. I did my PhD at Cranfield University, and I ended up in the States doing my postdoc at Carnegie Mellon University. And that's where I got into robotics. And I worked there on what we call multi-robot systems for the Department of Defense, DARPA Advanced Research Agency. And NASA was interested in the work I was doing. That's why I ended up at JPL. It wasn't planned. But I feel very privileged to work on Mars rovers. And I think the curiosity that I had as a kid is what still drives me, right? So I think it's very exciting times.
Presumably, though, it is much harder for people from developing countries to break into those big, high-profile international institutions.
That is correct, but I think if you look at medicine, there are a lot of people in the developing world that have been able to break into medicine in the United States and in Europe. But when it comes to robotics and other advanced technologies, because you don't have that kind of development in your country, it's very difficult to break through. But it doesn't mean there's lack of talent, it's just a lack of opportunity.
Ayanna, you're really fired up, I know, about embedding human cognitive ability into autonomous systems. Tell me, why do you feel it's so exciting and why have you devoted your life to this?
So basically what I try to do is think about the role of robotics is really to help us, really to help humankind. And so if I'm going to help a human, it has to be able to figure out, what is it a human thinks about? How do they feel? How do they anticipate things? And so I don't think we design robotic systems, or we should, without being involved with how humans think. Because if a robot does something that's unexpected, why is that? If the human is doing something and the robot can mimic it, that's really more understandable. So that's why I truly believe that robots are here for us, so they should act and think and function like us in some ways.
Robots, autonomous systems are already making a huge difference in society. But if we focus on healthcare, social care, those particular areas, where do you feel the advances could be made in the coming decades?
So I think one of the things with healthcare that is really this kind of golden nugget is really for quality of life. We're getting older, we're having less kids, and so there's this whole demographic of individuals that want to stay in their home. They want to live as they are when they were 30 or 40, and how can you do that? If you had a robotic assistant that, say, even did something as simple as clean your house or remind you of your medicine, I mean, that is little things, but those are the things that really enable you to stay in your home. And so I think that there's this whole area of healthcare where robots can assist, as well as in the clinic, as well as in the hospitals.
Ashitey, NASA programs are getting ever more ambitious. In 2018, we're going to see a solar mission. That was unimaginable 100 years ago. What difference do you think these extraordinary achievements in the realm of space exploration are making to ordinary society?
So I think NASA is one of the very few organizations in the world that actually impact each individual on Earth. You can look at it from GPS, you can look at it from inoculation in developing countries, where NASA technology plays a key role, especially phase-changing materials. We're able to refrigerate medicines where there's no power, to be able to go to all these developing countries and be able to inoculate people, do all these immunizations. NASA technology also plays a key role in farming in developing countries, like especially in Africa, where we have several Earth orbiting satellites that take images of the ground, be able to predict precipitation, be able to look at the soil quality, and be able to advise people what type of food to plant in different areas in Africa. We also do a lot of imaging of the water table across Africa, and we're looking at CO2, and we're looking at greenhouse gases and I think. So a lot of the technology that we develop in the space program actually does benefit mankind quite greatly. And most of the time, it does benefit people that haven't invested any money in the program.
You've also spoken a lot about the importance of inspiring the next generation. Tell us a bit about your work, particularly in Ghana and in Africa.
So in Ghana, I formed what we call the Ghana Robotic Academy Foundation, and we started a program called RISE, Robotics Inspired Science Education, and the emphasis on inspired. Robotics is just a vehicle, a tool to inspire kids, because quite frankly, if I go to a kid and I say, hey, let's go study organic chemistry, they're not going to come with me. But if I say, let's go build some robots, thousands of kids will come with you. And as I said earlier, kids have fertile imagination. So the key thing in developing countries is relating theory to practice, because people just learn raw theory and they don't see the benefits of math. But you can tell them that, look, you have an equation of a line. You have a sensor. You can calibrate your sensor with an equation of a line. So that's what we do. So we've been able to expose it to thousands of students across Ghana and in Africa as well.
Ayanna, you've been absolutely adamant that robotics enables boundaries to be crossed. What advice would you give to a young person contemplating a career in artificial intelligence, in robotics?
First, just do it. I think that the only boundaries we have are our own. And that's our kind of inner fear sometimes. And I think as a young person, it's just try it. Go online, figure out from the videos how to do stuff. You can make robots with cardboard and rubber bands. I mean, you don't need, full-blown electronics. And so I think it's really just your imagination that might stop you. So let it be free and just do it. I don't think there's any boundaries.
Ashitey, what advice would you give to a young Ghanaian who wants to enter your world in NASA?
So I would say we are on the precipice of life-changing technologies. I think there's never been a better time to be a technologist. And we have convergence of 3D printing, robotics, and artificial intelligence. And we have the internet. Right now, the internet is what we call an equalizer. Somebody can be at the most prestigious university in the world. Somebody can be in the remotest village in Africa. They have access to the same information. So I think that levels the playing field. The next thing you need is you have to be curious. Nobody is born a scientist. Everybody has the same capability. People are curious enough to develop themselves by reading and researching and applying themselves to that. So I think, to me, I say this is the greatest time to live. If I had my chance, I'll go back 20 years ago and come back again. And it's going to be a great time because technology is right at your fingertips. You have access to it. You can read and advance yourself and be very confident that you can make it if you apply yourself.
What would you say to those people who argue that robotics is actually diminishing interpersonal skills, the ability of one person to communicate effectively with another?
So robotics is just a tool that we use. The robot doesn't tell you what to do. It's the human that tells the robot what to do. It's the human that interacts with the robot. So I think robots are opening a whole new world for humanity. We are evolving into a different human-machine interaction, and we just have to get used to it. We're not going to be just human-to-human interaction anymore. There's going to be human-human interaction, human-machine interaction, and I think that's going to enrich the society.
Ayanna, do you share that view?
So I actually push back a little bit. I think our definition of communication is totally wrong. If you take a typical teenager, you're like, oh, you're always chatting on your phone. Why don't you go out with your friends? And they're like, well, I have friends in India. I have friends in London. I mean, I think our definition of how we communicate is changed. And as adults, we're trying to put in, no, you have to use the wearable phone. I think robots is another way of communicating. Robots are emotional. We can make them emotional. We can make them have empathy. We can make them have ways of mediating difficult conversations. I think it's a different form of communication. I think it will enhance the communication because it will communicate in things that we think about in terms of, being appropriate language and appropriate behavior.